Hey everybody, welcome back to episode number 4 of What Were They Thinking? In this series, I take iconic guitar licks, riffs, solos, trying to keep it kind of short and concise, and analyze what the player was thinking, or hopefully try to get somewhat into that player's head and what they were thinking. Today, I am looking at one of the most iconic guitar solos in rock history. That is Eruption by the incomparable Eddie Van Halen. What a great loss we had last year when Eddie tragically passed away at a very young age. A huge loss to the music community. And I thought it would be really nice to kind of take a deep dive in and see if we can maybe analyze the tapping section of Eruption, which you just heard me play in the intro. I did kind of my own little version of it. Now, one thing about the tabs, I tabbed this out in a very structured fashion. I mean, Eddie played this very freeform. I highly doubt he was sitting there playing to a metronome. So, you know, there's going to be some inconsistencies in how he played it, and I don't mean that in a bad way, just in, you know, his transitions. I didn't really try to go into detail in the tab of every little idiosyncrasy that he performed in string noise and whatnot. I just kind of put them into really musically relevant sections. So for all those real Van Halen purists, I wasn't really trying to do precisely what Eddie was doing here, but more put it in a structure that's going to be easy to understand and analyze for our purposes of this video. So let's dive right into it. Now, if I was to play you this chord progression, I think it would be very unlikely that the first thing that would enter your mind is Eruption. Has a very different sound, and like I said, I don't think anybody would automatically go to the place and go, hey, that's Eruption. But this is actually what Eddie did in this entire tapping section that goes from about halfway through maybe Eruption right through to the end. So you might say, why is this important? I think it's important because, well, this video is called What Were They Thinking? I'm trying to get in the head of Eddie Van Halen and what he was thinking when he was composing this or playing it, whether it was off the cuff. This seems very structured. I would imagine he had sort of pre-planned what he was going to do, at least on the tapping section. You know, the first part of Eruption is a little more haphazard and all over the place. He probably would never copy that the same way twice, but this section is kind of easily copied or redone, at least extremely close to what Eddie did. So what is actually happening in this whole tapping section? Well, before we discuss that, let's just talk a little bit about the technique he's using. So he's obviously using tapping, where we take a right hand finger and we hammer onto a note on the fretboard before pulling off to another fretted note from our left hand. So Eddie, you know, arguably was the first person to really popularize this. There's some arguments about whether anybody did this before him, but I think it goes without argument that he was the first one to really bring it to the forefront and influence generations of guitar players to play like this. So if we just take the first sequence, if we look at the tab, and you'll notice now there's chords above the tab here. We're going to talk about those in a second, but he taps with his right hand at the 9th fret. So he gets this note coming out. And then he pulls that off to the 2nd fret C sharp. So he's basically hitting a G sharp pulling off to a C sharp. Now you'll notice I kind of use my arm and other fingers to mute the other strings so that I'm not getting any excess noise. If I don't do that, we're going to have all these other notes and strings ringing out, and we don't want that. So I just kind of lay either the heel of my palm or my forearm, depending on what I'm doing, along the strings, and I mute everything else out, and I'll use like this index finger to lean down against the other strings, maybe the tip of it to touch up against the 3rd string, just to clean up any noise. Now, the sequence he uses is basically a tap note, pull off to another note, and a hammer on X number of frets above that, in this case from the 2nd to the 5th. So the first thing you want to do in this particular situation is get used to that sequence, because he basically doesn't change that sequence. He just navigates along the fretboard to different arpeggio shapes as he goes. So if you can get this pattern down, you've got everything you need to put this entire piece together, because then he just navigates around, like I said. And so on and so forth. You see, it's the same kind of mechanics to it. A lot of folks, when I was teaching, found that it was hard to get the timing down. So I mean, just go very slow with it. Really concentrate on getting your notes out very clean. And then just work up to getting the speed on it. Now, which finger do you use to tap? You'll notice in the intro, I didn't have a pick in my hand, so I played it kind of with my index finger. If you're playing live and you need to have a pick in your hand, oftentimes all I do is I keep holding my pick between my thumb and my first finger, and I use my middle finger. Whatever works best for you is going to be fine. You know, some folks will tuck their pick away in between their fingers and then, you know, and then navigate the pick back into picking position. I find that a little weird when I can just use my second finger. Unless you want to use multiple fingers for tapping. So that's a topic for another time. But so now let's dive into what he's doing after we've got the mechanics of that down. Well, the first chord he starts with is a C sharp. And if you look at it, we have the notes C sharp here at the 2nd fret, E, and we have a G sharp. If you go play a C sharp minor chord, those are the exact notes we have. We have the C sharp as the root, we have the G sharp as the 5, and we have the E as the minor third interval. So all he's doing is playing that C sharp chord. Then when he does this seemingly insignificant shift of not tapping in the 9th fret anymore, but taking that G sharp and moving it up to an A note, but keeping our left hand the same, we've now changed that to an A major chord. We now have the notes A, C sharp, and E. If we go to an A major chord, we have A as the root, E as the 5, the C sharp is the major third. So by going between that, we're actually switching between. Now we'll see the theoretical significance of that in a moment once we add a few more chords to it. So what we have to start with, okay, now he switches up to the tapping hand staying in the same place. So what's happened is we've shifted our tapping hand. Now we're going to shift our fretting hand to a little bit of a different chord to some ears here. The notes we have now are A, D sharp, and F sharp. And if we put those notes together, we actually end up with a D sharp diminished chord. Now you might go, wow, that's a weird chord to put in there out of the blue, but you'll see how this makes sense in a moment. So far 3 chords: C sharp minor, A major, D sharp diminished. Now, he does a little transition. A lot of times through this, when he does a picking pattern, you'll notice it's a measure, it's triplets. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That represents 1 beat. So it's actually groups of 6 rather than triplets. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's your measure, right? We switch up. Again, another measure. We switch up again to the D sharp diminished. But what he does here is on the last beat, or the last set of 6, he actually moves the tap note up to the 12th fret. So it's actually now, we could name that a completely different chord, and in this case, if we did, that would be B, D sharp, F sharp. B, D sharp, F sharp would be a B major chord for a beat. Now, you'll notice I didn't notate that. I could have put it in there, but I kind of tend to think that goes by so quickly, especially when it's up to speed, right? I guess it does. It's a B. Maybe I should have notated in there. But it is a B major chord, but I almost think of it more as a passing chord and leading into the next chord. But keep that B major in mind for a moment, because it's quite interesting when we move into the next chord. So next he now shifts both hands. He's up tapping at the 12th fret, B, on the second string, pulling off to E on the second string, and then hammering on again to a G sharp. Well, if we take those notes, that becomes an E major chord. Right? E being the root, B being the 5, and G sharp being the major third. So now let's analyze all of that. We have our C sharp minor, A major, D sharp diminished, little transition, E major. The transition being the B major chord. So that gives us C sharp minor, A major, B major, E major, and D sharp diminished. Well, that's one of the most common chord progressions in pop rock music. It's what we call a 1-4-5-6 chord progression. In the key of E, the 1 being E, the 4 chord being A, the 5 chord being B major, all of those previous chords major, and then the 6th chord being C sharp minor. Now the funny thing is, if we go to the 7th chord of a key, it becomes a diminished triad, and that's what he does here, which is often designed to lead us back to resolving to the number 1 chord. So we actually go from 6 minor to 4 major to 7 diminished with a little B major for a beat, which ends up leading us back to E major. So this D sharp diminished resolves us back up to the E. So we have very, very typical chord progression. I mean, the diminished chord probably not thrown into a lot of pop rock music, but a perfectly diatonic chord to this key, meaning it comes right from the notes of this key. Now this is where it kind of goes off the rail. You'll notice the next part in measure 5, we go to a C major chord, not a chord from the key of E major anymore. Then he moves up to a D and then back to an E. So it just kind of climbs up in whole steps, C major, D major, and back to an E. Now, how does that work as far as the tapping goes? Well, we move up to tapping at the 13th fret C, pulling off to the 5th fret E, and then hammering on to the 8th fret G. C, E, G. Well, again, if we're in a C major chord, C being the root, G being the 5, E being the major third. So slowly, if we put that all together now, we have and you really hear the tonality changes away from the key to that C major chord. What he does after that is this little lead into chords again. So he does 3 beats of the C, let's say. Keeps the left hand steady, moves up 2 frets to the D note with our tapping hand. So now again, I could notate that chord as something completely different. We'd have the notes D, E, and G, which I guess we could think of as like an E minor 7th, but again, it's just for an instant, so I didn't bother notating those. I'm thinking of those as just simple transitions to the next chord. Because you'll see that where he transitions up on that last beat of the bar is the starting tapping note of the next chord. In this case, it's going to be moving to a D major. So he transitions to a D major by going. And you'll see, so what happens is my right hand moves first, followed by my left hand. And now we're into playing the 15th fret, 7th fret, and 10th fret on the same strings. This is all on the 2nd string, or at least how I've played it. It could also be performed on other strings. I don't really know where Eddie did it, but I'm doing it here. So we now have D, F sharp, and A. Well, go to a D major chord. The D is the root, the A is the 5 interval, and the F sharp is the major third. And then he does this same transition, up 2 frets with our right hand, our tapping hand. And again, we could look at that and say, okay, that's also going to be a different chord, but we're thinking of it more as just a passing lead into the next chord. Then once he's up here at the 17th, he shifts this fretting hand up 2 frets to 17, 9, and 12. which is E, G sharp, and B. Again now, back to our E major chord. E being the 1, B being the 5 interval, and the major third being the G sharp. So we end up with... Now that's the only one he doesn't do a transition on, because he stays there and he does something interesting after that. But let's take a look at what we have so far. So we started off with C sharp minor, move to A major, move to D sharp diminished, a little short on B major for one beat to an E major, C major, transition, D major, transition, so that's what we have so far. Now it gets kind of interesting because he does another thing with some more movement where the tapping hand stays more consistent, but the fretting hand moves. So we ended here at this E major arpeggio. He keeps the tap going at the E note on the 17th fret of the second string, but he shifts the fretting hand up to the B and the D notes. Now you could think of this as, 1 and a 5, and then the D is the flat 7. There's no third in there, so we don't really know whether this is major or minor. It's almost, because we're coming off an E major chord, it would kind of have an E dominant 7th tonality, but he does something interesting. He just kind of does 2 sets of the tap pattern, then shifts chromatically down with his fretting hand, like this. Now, yes, we could name each of those chords. I didn't do that again. I'm not really that interested. I think this more just implies that E major tonality, and he's kind of chromatically climbing down to resolve back to that chord. And it sounds like this. And there, kind of hear it back to the E major. So I thought it might be a little bit confusing if we went in and kind of named each of those, like, I think there's a diminished chord in there. And so I thought it was easier if we just kind of think of it as targets, right? And ending on that same E major. He does that for 2 bars. Then he shifts that whole thing, so he targets now the D note on the 15th fret, and he goes D, A, C. Now again, we're not going to name that because I think this is all just resolving back to a D major chord. He does the same thing he did before, just now 2 frets lower. So, but he only does that for 1 bar. So we had this. And then he does another shift where he moves down 2 frets lower yet again. And does the same sort of chromatic walk down, and this time into a C major chord. So the whole thing . And that basically outlines a kind of a chromatic walking down. Yes, there's different chords on each beat, but it kind of complicates things. I think to my ear, we're going E major, this little chromatic walk down, D major, C major, which then leads him finally to the last set of chords. The next set, he's going to be tapping at the 12th fret, pulling off to the 4th fret and hammering on at the 7th fret. So B, D sharp, F sharp, which makes, again, a chord we saw back in the beginning for that little passing chord. B major, back diatonic to the key of E major. So we have the 1 interval for B, we have the F sharp, which is the 5 interval, and we have our major third, which is the D sharp. And that sounds like this. Now, what's interesting is he keeps tapping at the 12th fret, but he just shifts the fretting hand up 1 fret to the 5th and 8th frets, and now he has B, E, and G, so which is an E minor chord. So he goes back and forth between those a couple times. He goes a B, an E minor, and a B, I believe. So there's no shifting of the tapping hand. It's just going to be the fretting hand. Then he does something neat. He goes very quickly, one set of tapping on each of those chords back and forth for, I believe, a couple bars. So that's just like going back and forth from E minor to B very quickly, one beat each. So that whole end part is basically a B major chord to an E minor to a B to an E minor ending. So that whole end part after this section before ending with a thunderous low E and a dive bomb, which implies that E minor chord again. So what do you guys think? Was that clear, concise? I hope it was. There's a lot to unpack there, but what's really interesting and the takeaways I came up with from it was there's some times here he's just following really typical chord progressions, which kind of makes sense. It sounds very musical, but for the time when this was, back in 1978, I believe, nobody else was doing anything like this. From the tone he was getting, to this new kind of tapping technique that people were really puzzled about. It was a real eye-opener, and I mean, thank goodness for this. What has Eruption influenced? Well, pretty much any rock guitar player through the 80s, any of the hair metal guys and any of those players and beyond that were all heavily influenced by what Eddie did. And there was some really incredible music made, I think, because of what Eddie did on, well, the whole first Van Halen record, but especially on this Eruption solo. So what a tip of the hat to him. And I hope that somehow did justice to getting inside the head of such a master, such a brilliant, brilliant musician. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. I was playing through my Line 6 Marketplace PV Ultimate preset, which is based off of the 5150 amp model that we have in the Helix. That's available on the Line 6 Marketplace. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope the tabs were clear. I hope I explained it clearly, and I hope I didn't misspeak anywhere in there. And I hope that helps you to maybe want to tackle this piece. Sometimes it can be a little bit intimidating when we look at something like this, but breaking it down like that, taking it slow, understanding how these sections are put together, I think really can help us to kind of dive right in and give it a shot and never really shy away from it. And if we have played it before, wonderful. I hope you understand it better, or maybe you already knew all this, and that's wonderful too. I hope you still enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some use out of watching it. Spread the word about this series. I'm having a blast doing this. There's much more to come. I'm getting a lot of really positive comments, and I really thank you guys for that, and thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out, and I will be back really soon with some more. Thanks so much again. Ciao for now.